in Recovery. I'm your host, Anthony Acampora. Faith in Recovery radio show focuses on areas of advice and insight for families of those in addiction and dealing with mental health issues. We have powerful personal testimonies on this show. We also have guests who are experts in their field. I'm also the director and chaplain at Banyan Treatment Center's Faith in Recovery program. The Faith in Recovery program is a faith-based drug and alcohol treatment program. It's non-denominational, Christ-centered. The program is designed to allow clients to establish or restore their faith and relationship with God while also addressing their addiction. So if they never had a relationship with God, they're going to establish one in this program. And if they did have one and fell away from Him, they're going to reestablish it, or they're going to restore that relationship. And that's really all that's required for this program. And we meet everyone right where they're at on their spiritual journey. They may not even have a spiritual journey. That's okay too. So it's a non-judgmental, non-condemning in nature type program. So we have a great guest on. I want to get right to it. I'm going to introduce him now at this time. Dave Kohout. He is the founder and director of Talk is Cheap organization. He has been involved in leadership training for most of his adult life. He has spoken before over 500,000 students, teachers, and academic leaders. Wow, that's a scary thought. At over 600 different schools. He has presented at West Point Military Academy, Westminster College, and the Coast Guard Academy, just to name a few. He's the author of Standing in the Presence of Greatness, which is actually a great book. I was reading it last night. And it's an easy read, and it's very to the point, and it's short, which I like. It's kind of like my book. It's very short. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but it's very, very powerful and very insightful. So welcome to the Faith in Recovery radio show, Dave Kohout.
Thank you, Anthony. It's fun to be with you, bud.
We're so glad to have you on. Dave actually spoke at Banyan's Faith in Recovery program a couple of weeks ago. And I tell you, it was absolutely powerful. There was not one client that walked out during his time speaking, and there was probably 30, 35 clients in there. Some of them were the faith program clients, some of them were our traditional programming clients, but he had their attention. And I highly recommend Dave as a speaker. He speaks all over, as he's going to speak about, but I highly recommend him, and I highly recommend his book, Standing in the Presence of Greatness. So Dave, let's start off with, tell us a little bit about your background, about your story. How did you get to this point? It's usually preceded by some pain and some brokenness out there. That's kind of how God operates with that a lot. So and He could really do something with us people that were broken. So Dave, tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. In fact, I read your book as well, and Overcoming Emotional Obstacles Through Faith, and I had to smile often while I read it because it sounded very much like my story. I grew up in a good home. I grew up with both parents who are still alive today and married today and to each other, which I guess you have to emphasize anymore. Oldest of four, Roman Catholic kid, but by high school really had no clue what I was doing with my life. Spiritually, I had fallen away from my faith, my youth, faith of youth, and started making some pretty bad decisions. It all culminated in 1981 when a friend of mine was trying to share Christ with me, and I basically gave him a certain hand gesture, which was not he was number one, and told him to leave me alone, left his house, and thought the best option was to go home and stick a 22 in my mouth and in my life, because clearly I was a joke and a mistake. And God from there took me at the very bottom, the very lowest point I'd hit, and began to touch my heart and my mind. I literally did say walking home that day, God, if you real, help me. And He did. And I'm no longer that kid, no longer that thought process, and I can only give all the credit to God.
Wow, that's powerful, absolutely. I tell you, we hear this over and over again. It's usually, the Bible talks about seeking God with all of our heart. It mentions it over and over and over. And, like I said before, it's usually preceded by a lot of pain to get to that point where we put our hand up and say, you know what, I need you, God. You win. You know, where are you? Okay, and that's kind of like what it sounds like. It's like what happened with you here. What about that story that you have in the book? You want to share a little bit about that when that person came up to you and gave you a message from God there?
Yeah. I mean, I share the story a lot, and I've often had people come up to me afterwards, and they're like, so, dude, tell me the truth. Is that really what happened? And I'm like, yeah, listen, I celebrate finding my house every night, which means my memory's not that super great. So to be able to carry that lie this long would be virtually impossible. But in 81, as I said, after my buddy Vic tried to share Christ with me, I had that coming to Jesus moment where I just said, I give up. I can't do it anymore. I don't like me. I don't want to be me. Help me. And within 3 weeks, I found myself on the first of many family vacations with my then girlfriend, now bride, and her family, who went to the Outer Banks every year. What I didn't understand was that their trip included a stop in Virginia Beach with my father-in-law, my then girlfriend's dad, his family. His sister lived in Virginia Beach with her husband. And when it came time for the blessing of the meal, you know, again, growing up Catholic, bless us are thou and these thy gifts is what I'm about ready to pray when they said we're going to ask the blessing. But Uncle Frank started talking, and he started with Father. And when he said that, I opened my eyes, looking around like, who's here? And I had no clue. I'd never heard anyone pray any differently than what I grew up with.
Right.
So that kind of shocked me. And again, to make a very long story short, what I didn't know was Uncle Frank and Aunt Doris were both born-again believers.
Sure.
And had a relationship with Jesus Christ. So they started praying for me. And on that Outer Banks trip, a few days later, we had a rain day at the beach. And I don't know for your listeners if most can appreciate this, but ADD or ADHD people can. When it's a rain day at the beach and there's nothing to do and people break out games and say this will be fun, it's not. A fun board game would be going out in the front yard with their board game, throwing it up in the air and shooting it with a sawed-off shotgun. That would be a fun game. But I don't think most people appreciate that. So my girlfriend and I went to a laundromat, and we're already in the dryer section. People are always asking me, like, did you do a lot of laundry? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe we washed a sock. I don't remember. But we were, unfortunately, drinking beer, which was not cool because we were not of age. But as we're sitting there getting a buzz on, this kid walked in, blew by 2 rows of washing machines, walked up to our row of dryers, came directly up to me and said, God told me to come in here and tell you he loves you. And I started laughing. I mean, I looked around, I was a little uncomfortable. I'm like, really? And I sarcastically said, you know, is there anything else that God wanted you to have me know? And he kind of looked at me like, no, that's pretty much it. And as he left, I mocked him. And he turned back around, and I honestly thought we were going to get into a fist fight. And instead, he shared a 1-minute testimony of how Christ changed his life. And he handed me a Bible tract, which I had no idea what that was. So this kind of a sales technique 101 is if you hand people something, they'll usually take it. He handed me the tract, I took it, and what he doesn't know, he'll never know until eternity, is that I didn't read the beginning of it. I looked at the very back, which I find a lot of people do have a tendency to do the same thing.
Right.
And the back of the tract had 3 addresses. You're where right now? Broadcasting from where?
Miami.
Yeah, so Miami would have been like, yeah, I know Miami. But these addresses meant nothing to me until I looked at the third one, and the third one said Youngstown, Ohio.
Right.
And that completely freaked me out because that's where I was from. And even though I was in the Outer Banks, I'm like, how could this dude know where I live? And he gives me a piece of paper that's got a story about Christ in it and this town I'm from. So keeping it short, I told no one, got back to Youngstown after that vacation, looked for the house, and straight up, it was a man by the name of Cosmo DeBarlow, which can be mentioned because Cosmo's been in ministry all of his life. He's in his 90s now. And he was the president at the time of Full Gospel Businessmen, which I didn't know any of this. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know who he was.
Sure. But
he was right across the street from Victor's house.
Amazing.
And that began the crisis of belief for me, as Henry Blackaby says, where I was like, this can't be coincidence.
Right.
And of course, we know it's not. It's God's providence.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, we had this thing at the program. We actually used to do a whole group on it. It was happening so much, and we called it God Incidents. And these are clients that some of them are on the fence, some of them don't even really believe at all, and they haven't been exposed to any of this. Some of them are from the traditional program. They come up to a devotional group in the morning, and people would just share about things similar to what you just described, or sometimes just it kind of blows your mind. And they'll say, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but something's going on here, because this is the strangest thing that's ever happened. And I think what happens is the reason it seems so strange is because oftentimes people put God in a box and compare him to the natural and to people. And so it's like if you're a CEO of a company and, you know, there's 3,000 employees, and you're thinking, this guy probably doesn't even know my name, or he doesn't even know I exist, and that's 3,000 employees. Here's, you know, God's dealing with 7.4 billion people in the world. How's he going to take time to have somebody say he loves me, like that type of thing? So it kind of boggles our mind, but when you start to see this stuff over and over and over again, it's like, well, there he goes again. This God is amazing. You know,
and to piggyback off of that point, the other question becomes, why would he care about me?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so there are that many people, and it does seem like he's trying to speak to me, but why would he? How could he love me when I don't even like me?
Right, absolutely. You mentioned it earlier, and in the book, that, you know, we have worth, we have value. And when you're in active addiction, or when you're dealing with major depression, or you're just dealing with a lot of guilt and shame and pain, and you're in darkness, the last thing you're thinking of is God will want anything to do with you after all the stuff, you know, you were involved in and that we did. Why would he want to waste his time with me? So we feel like we have no value, and we do. We want to try to see ourselves through his eyes. You know, it's just
exactly right.
Yeah, it's just amazing. You mentioned quite a bit, and I know we mentioned that you've spoken to so many young people and students and things like that. You talk a lot about your desire to have people reach their full potential, and that makes sense. It aligns with why you would want to start young, because you know you have more time there for them to start doing the right thing if you catch them early and keep them away from the wrong things. But tell us a little bit about that. What gave you that such a strong desire for that, to really want to speak into people's lives and build them up and speak life into them?
Okay, well, let me circle back to your last point, and I'll address full potential. It's John 3:16. Everybody seems to know it by heart. My mentor, Chuck McGowan, said, David, always read around the verses. Yes. He asked me, what's 17 say? And I'm like, didn't even know there was a 17. He goes, open your Bible, look at it. For God did not send his son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. And I'm looking at him, he's like, so what's that mean? I'm like, well, I guess in essence, God's not mad at us. He's trying to give us a lifeline. He goes, exactly. Yes. So we know he sent his son, and we know we have to believe, but we need to know that Jesus isn't mad at us. And that was a game changer for me, and to come back to the point of full potential. You know, Anthony, I had all those years, 18 years plus of negativity about myself. Of course not as a little kid. Who has a clue as a little kid? But once I could put two and two together, I'm like, I'm a mistake. I have to be a mistake because my siblings are nothing like me. Right. As I grew in the Word of God, which Romans 12:2 says, be not conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed. As I grew in the Word, I began to see my self-worth through God's eyes, and I realized everybody has worth. Yes. No matter who they are, no matter where they are. The adulterous woman was caught, the Bible says, in the very act, and yet Jesus was redeeming her. Right. You know, the people in the scriptures that God touches, they're almost all messed up and doing something wrong, and God still loves them. Absolutely. So when I go into a school, obviously I cannot share any of that unless it's a private school or a Catholic school, and then I'm allowed. But I want that audience to know, when I'm saying standing in the presence of greatness, and you got that narcissistic kid sitting there going, dude, I'm awesome. No, you're not. You're 12 years old. You don't even drive a car yet. But the potential for awesomeness is in you. The seed of greatness is in you. And I try to build off of that. Again, if I could reference Scripture, I'd say, look, the Bible says we're all made in the image of God. So given the fact that God's the greatest, we obviously must have some attributes of greatness. Sure. So I just build off of that as best I can without burning a bridge with the school by crossing a line. Yeah. And honestly, Anthony, I'll tell you, as much as it was a blast and an honor to be able to serve that day with your clients at Banyan, to come into a public school and see 12, 1,500, 2,000 plus kids sitting there with their arms folded, rolling their eyes like whatever, another speaker. Yep. And then 90 minutes later, they stand in line and have to get passes because they're late for the next class, which the principal's like, hey man, that's cool, you know, just keep talking to the kids. And they want to talk to me. And again, I don't want to keep talking here, but the bottom line is they didn't realize that they had potential. But once they see my story, and as you remember when I showed my transcript and my amazing GPA of 1.68, they begin to put their own pieces together and go, maybe there is hope for me.
Right. That's awesome. We're going to need to take a quick break, but I just want to follow up with that. With you mentioned that a 1.6 GPA and the flaws that we have. And you could look through the Bible and you see it over and over again. They're all flawed. Nobody was perfect, but God still used them. It encourages people, because people could be like, wow, I didn't realize that. I didn't know God would use a guy that was killing Christians. And, now he writes, 2/3 of the New Testament, and he's the greatest missionary ever, Apostle Paul. So it gives them hope. And that's really what it's all about. And you do a great job at that. We're going to have to take a quick break. We're going to be back in 30 seconds. Faith and Recovery. I'm your host, Anthony Acampora. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Are you struggling with addiction or mental health disorders? Banyan Treatment Center's Faith and Recovery program helps people at the depths of their despair, spreading the word that recovery is possible through the power of Christ.
Cry out to him. Where are you, God? Where are you? I don't feel you. Where's your presence? Why are you allowing this to happen? He already knows our thoughts anyway. We might as well just put it out there.
Program Director Anthony Acampora will help you discover how God can turn your mess into your message. Call Banyan Treatment Center for help now. 888-230-3122. Again, that's 888-230-3122.
Welcome back to Banyan's Faith and Recovery radio show. I'm your host, Anthony Acampora, talking with a really special guest here, Dave Kohout from Ohio. He's the founder and director of Talk is Cheap, Inc. The message isn't. Talk is cheap, but the message isn't. I like that. He just told me about that during the break. So, Dave, anything you want to follow up on what we were speaking about earlier, or do you want? We're going to move into Talk is Cheap and talk a little bit about that.
Just a real quick point that when I hand out my business card, obviously they see the name on the front, but when they read the back, I think that folks who read it see my heart. It says I would rather build boys and girls than rebuild men and women. Obviously, your focus is more the men and women, but that's because as young boys and girls, they were making poor decisions, and that poor decision-making just continued to snowball. Our hope is that we can get a young person to understand, look, your value is not based on who you are, what you do. Your value is who you are and the choices you make that are good and can help other people. So we try to encourage kids, look for a way to serve. As a joke at the end, and I'm quite serious though, is if you haven't made your bed this morning, when you go home today, go home and make your bed. That'll be the first step towards making better choices. And we've had actually kids email us and go, dude, we did it. And I'm like, good, you did it. That's all we can ask for.
That's awesome. But, when you look around and look in different areas and things like that, and when there's not a mentor, maybe there's not a father figure in the family, and all you have is negativity around you. I mean, I give kids that come out of that environment so much credit to overcome, because it cannot be easy if all the peer pressure and everything that's around you is saying, do this. And then they get made fun of if they do the right thing and they start getting good grades. So it's like, what's the point? I might as well just, conform to what's going on here. So having somebody like you out there, I mean, it's just, it's so incredible and so powerful. It's just amazing that you're out there. We love it. We love it. So talk a little bit about, a little bit more about Talk is Cheap. And remember, talk is cheap. So when you're talking.
That's right.
That was pretty bad.
And that name is based on an experience I had as a copier salesman. I sold copiers for about 16 years. Yeah. And when I got out of the industry and went to work for Fellowship of Christian Athletes for a couple of years, I began to realize, gosh, talk really is cheap. The guys and ladies at FCA were putting their money where their mouth was. I had the skill set to be able to go back into that world and speak. But I didn't want to just be a speaker. People say all the time, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I go into high schools and speak to kids. I never say I'm a public speaker, because there's a lot of public speakers. Yeah. I don't want to be a speaker. I want to be a difference maker. Yes. And when I get into the audience in front of kids, your number one adversary is the fact that they don't trust you. So I have to build that trust within the 35, 55, 75, 90 minutes I get. And we do. I'm not a very good social media guy. If you go to our website, talkischeapinc.com or sitpod.com, there's not a lot on there because, unfortunately, it's just not an area that I focus on as much as I know I should. But those kids get enough resource from there and some YouTube videos we have that they'll message me. Anthony, this happened the other day. We had a young lady that emailed me, and she said, I heard you speak 10 years ago. I was a senior at Boardman High School. I'm 27 now. I'm trying to help my 9-year-old niece, and I realized I needed to point her towards your messages. So we've watched you on YouTube, we bought your book, and I just wanted to tell you you're still making a difference. And I'm thinking, who could put a price on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There is no price on it. You know, you can't measure that. I don't know. I'm sure you probably saw this movie Woodlawn, and because when you said I remember when the chaplain he talked to Tony Nathan. He said, "Fellowship of Christian Athletes. We got a meeting tonight, Tony. You going to be there?" And then the coach went there and he was looking in the window and he left. And it was just, I love that movie. We watch it all the time. And but it's so, the way they laid that out in that movie was so authentic. Like, even with the coach, like he didn't really believe and he didn't know what was going on with this. And then he sees the change in his team, his players, and it's like, what is going on? So yeah, exactly. Talk is cheap. So when you see that, and then he changes, and you see God transform, his life, and that was based on a true story too. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible, and it kind of reminds me of what you do, I would think, because. Any relation there? Did you see that movie?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just wish we had another hour to talk because you got my mind spinning in so many directions. One of the most impactful movies for me was a secular movie. Certainly don't encourage a lot of folks to see it if they're thin-skinned with language and some scenes, but Patch Adams. Hunter Adams puts himself in a psych ward in '69. Quickly realizes no one really cares about his story. He's trying to explain it to the doctor while the doctor's tasting his coffee and adding more cream.
Right.
And what I took from that movie was people really do not care about us, most people. And the few you get, we have to take advantage of that and come up alongside them and let them help us like you guys do, like I do. Mm-hmm. The other movie's Facing the Giants, in that scene where Brock's thinking the team they're going to play on Friday night is going to beat them. They haven't even played it yet. And the coach has them going down and doing the bear crawl across the field. That poor kid didn't know he went across the whole field.
Right.
And the coach's point is, Brock, you have the gift of leadership. Yeah. And if you don't stand for that leadership, the team's going to follow your lead and we're never going to make it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it just to keep the theme of the movies, Bronx Tale. I remember De Niro used to always tell his son, he was a bus driver, De Niro, and he was like, wasted talent. There's nothing worse than wasting talent. And that's really what the root is, I think, that you're doing. You don't want these kids to waste their talent because they have such talent. Well, what's the saying? It says, our talents are God's gift to us, and what we do with it are our gift back to God. We don't want to waste these things that He gave us.
Jesus' word in John 10:10, and it's heartbreaking because we're seeing it come to fruition. Look at how many people have been destroyed, how many goals, dreams, ideas have been killed. And Christ said, He's come to rob, kill, and destroy, but I've come to give you life and give it to you in abundance.
Yes.
And I'm not talking roll up to a Lexus, put your hand on it, and say, God, I need this. I'm talking about living out your dream and being able to go help somebody else like you and I are. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this radio program today has somebody listening going, so you're telling me I can make a difference too? And the answer is you already are making a difference. The question is, what difference are you making?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Dave, tell us, we got about a minute left or so. Tell us a little bit about the book, Standing in the Presence of Greatness. Where could people get that? It's such a great read. It's short. It's like 72 pages. It's so authentic. Yeah, I like that. Mine's about the same length. Could tell us a little bit about things. I want people to get this because it's powerful.
Well, I don't want to sound like Joe Spiritual, but I'm going to say God gave me a word, and the word was sitpog, S-I-T-P-O-G, which is simply standing or sitting in the presence of greatness. And in that book, what we do is we tell 7 simple stories, and I said 7 because that's God's number, 7. You can see just how simple-minded I am now. And in each of those stories, we're just showing people, look, I broke my mouth, I had it wired shut, I couldn't really speak, but I was in straight commission sales. How'd I make it? And I tell the story of how we made it because of God's help. Every one of these stories in the book is simply to remind people, I know you think you're at the end and there's no options, but with God, there's a whole new set of options. Let Him have control. And I think that's what you guys talk about in the first step, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're helpless and powerless.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I tell you, that was a tough chapter to read because I used to bench press at home on this really rickety bench, and I used to always have a fear that was going to break and that was going to come down on me. So that was tough. But Dave, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to have you back. You were amazing. I wish we had more time. If you or someone you know is in need of treatment, please take that leap of faith. Go online, faithandrecovery.com or banyontreatmentcenter.com, or give us a call at 888-270-5712. I'm Anthony Acampora. Join us every Saturday and Sunday at 1:30 on The Word, 94.9 FM and AM 950, and at 9:30 on Saturdays on 970 AM FaithTalk Atlanta. He heals the brokenhearted, and he binds up their wounds. God bless you. Thanks for joining us.